I never imagined there would come a day when I'd have to wear a wedding dress while lying motionless on a hospital bed. Nor could I have guessed that, in that darkest of moments, a man would still hold my hand and vow to stay by my side for life, even when he didn't know if I would ever open my eyes again. When everyone believed it was a final farewell, life gave me a miracle. And that miracle is the reason I'm here to tell you my story. This is not just a story about life's hardships and the power of love. It's proof that miracles still exist, hidden in the ordinary. My name is Emily Parker, and I was born and raised in a small, dusty town deep in the heart of Texas. My childhood was filled with long, red dirt roads that stretched endlessly beneath the burning sun, rows of aging wooden houses packed tightly together, and those sweltering summer nights when the hum of cicadas echoed across the fields, drowning out even sleep. My father was a highway repair worker, often gone for weeks at a time. My mother, a frail but resilient woman, spent her days hunched over a sewing machine in a local factory, stitching from dawn till dusk to feed 3 children. We never had much, but she made sure we never went to bed hungry. From an early age, I knew our town was far too small. People here grew up, took factory jobs, or followed their fathers to construction sites. I watched older friends drop out of school, rush into early marriages, and then become trapped in the same cycle of poverty. Deep down, I kept telling myself, I have to leave. No matter what it takes, I have to go. The day I decided to leave was as scorching as my fate felt back then. It was a late May morning. Texas blue skies blindingly bright, the air thick with heat. I stood in the high school yard holding my diploma, a strange mixture of fear and excitement rushing through me. Some of my friends had already enrolled in the local community college. Others were getting ready for marriage. But me? I had only one thought: get out, as fast as I can. A few days later, I grabbed my mother's old suitcase, stuffed in a few clothes and the small savings I had managed to collect, and boarded a southbound bus, heading toward Houston, the big city I had long imagined as a promised land. In my 18-year-old mind, Houston meant skyscrapers glowing with lights, well-paid office jobs, and elegant people hurrying through glassy shopping centers. I was sure that with enough hard work, I'd build a brighter life, one far removed from the small-town dust I came from. Reality, however, hit hard and fast. When I arrived in Houston, I rented a cramped room in a rundown neighborhood on the city's south side. The walls were damp and peeling, the window frame crooked and never shut properly. Hot air and the noise of arguments from the hallway drifted in every night. My only possessions were that old suitcase and a small diary. I got a job at a food packaging factory. The work was repetitive and grueling, standing for hours on the production line, sticking labels on frozen food boxes, inhaling the nauseating smell of plastic and chemicals. After each 12-hour shift, my hands burned, my feet were swollen, and my back ached so badly I wanted to collapse on the spot. But I kept telling myself, just hold on for a few years, save some money. I'll study again, or find something better. This is only temporary. And then fate led me to Kyle. Kyle lived in the same building, a few years older than me. He had a rugged charm, the smooth voice, and those gray eyes that seemed to hypnotize. In the beginning, he acted kind. When I ran out of food money, he bought me a hamburger. When I missed the bus, he gave me a ride in his old pickup truck. For a lonely young girl lost in a strange city, those small gestures felt like lifelines. I thought he was good. I even thought maybe he could be my anchor. But soon, the darker side of him surfaced. Kyle was deeply addicted to drugs. He often disappeared for days, returning gaunt, red-eyed and reeking of smoke and chemicals. He took me to dark rooms where loud music pounded through the walls, where people passed around pills and syringes like candy. I trembled with fear, trying to pull away, but Kyle tightened his hold on me day by day. He made me his captive lover, bound by fear and manipulation. I begged. I tried to run, but every time he whispered threats in my ear. If you leave me, I'll find you, and you'll regret it. I believed him because I was too scared not to. The next 2 years were hell. I lived in violence and fear, my body numb and my spirit broken. There were nights I curled up on the floor and thought about ending my life just to be free. But every morning I got up, dragged myself to work, and came home to that same dark room, trapped in a loop of despair. Then one day, the police raided the complex. Kyle was arrested for drug possession and trafficking. I still remember his eyes as they cuffed him, defiant, unrepentant. A few months later, I heard he had died in prison of an overdose. When I got the news, I sank to the floor and burst into tears, half crying, half laughing. I couldn't tell whether it was grief, relief, or something in between. Maybe it was all of it. The chains that had bound me for 2 long years were finally broken. But freedom did not mean peace, because without Kyle, I had to face a new enemy. The fear inside myself. I was terrified I might be sick, terrified of people's judgment, terrified of the blank future ahead. I felt like a survivor of a great storm, standing alone among the wreckage. And that was only the beginning of the darkness waiting for me. After Kyle's death, I thought I had escaped hell. But soon I realized hell was only just beginning. Every morning I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of my tiny rented room. The face staring back was gaunt and hollow, eyes sunken deep, skin dull and gray from sleepless nights. I no longer recognized the girl who once stood under the scorching Texas sun clutching her diploma, filled with dreams of escaping her small town. In the mirror now was someone else. A stranger with haunted eyes and trembling shoulders, constantly on the verge of breaking. I was consumed by the thought that I might be carrying a deadly disease. During those 2 years trapped with Kyle, I had lost all control over my body and my choices. The fear of having HIV drove me nearly insane, but I couldn't bring myself to get tested. I didn't dare go to a clinic. Instead, I lived in constant terror, panicking at every scratch, every ache, every wave of fatigue. At night, I would lie there, listening to my heart pounding wildly, drenched in sweat, haunted by images of dying alone in that filthy room. I often whispered to the ceiling, if I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone even notice? Then, my body began to rebel. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. One day, while working my shift at the factory, a tightness seized my chest. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook uncontrollably. My vision blurred, and darkness closed in. I collapsed right there on the factory floor, gasping for air, convinced I was dying. An older coworker rushed over, shouting for help. Her panicked voice echoed above the machinery. "Call 911! She can't breathe!" The next thing I remember was the blaring siren of an ambulance, flashing red and blue lights slicing through the fog in my mind. When I came to, I was strapped to a stretcher, wires and sensors clinging to my body. I could hear the paramedics murmuring words I barely caught. Panic attack, trauma, suicide risk. They took me straight to the Houston Medical Center, where I was admitted for emergency psychiatric treatment. When the door closed behind me with a cold, metallic click, I knew I was no longer free. I was being locked away, even from myself. In the hospital records, I was no longer Emily Parker. I was simply female patient, 20 years old, admitted for severe depression and PTSD. The doctors prescribed heavy doses of sedatives. I swallowed them quietly, letting my body drift into that hazy, dreamlike state, half awake, half asleep. The next morning, a nurse told me they had contacted my parents. They drove nearly 200 miles from our small town to reach me. When my mother saw me lying on that hospital bed, her eyes turned red and swollen. My father sat silently beside her, his rough, calloused hands trembling in his lap. They signed the hospital paperwork, worked with the social worker to apply for Medicaid so my treatment could continue. I remember the sound of their pens scratching on the forms, their hushed voices speaking to the doctors, and I understood. They still loved me, but they were exhausted, unsure what else they could do. After a few days, they returned home to their jobs, promising to visit whenever possible. And so I was left behind once more, surrounded by 4 sterile, white walls. Time in the hospital passed like a blur. Each morning, I was awakened by the clinking of the nurse's medicine cart. In the afternoon, I was led out into the small concrete courtyard surrounded by tall metal fences. At night, I heard screams, laughter, the hurried footsteps of nurses rushing down the hallway. In those rare moments of clarity, I would sit by the small window, gazing out at the patch of withered grass beyond, and ask myself, is this where I'll spend the rest of my life? As a hollow shell, trapped between medication and memories. That thought terrified me, but at the same time, it felt like an unchangeable truth. I believed my life was already over. Days in the hospital passed like a slow-moving current, heavy and endless. Each day I swallowed round white pills and drifted into a dazed state, suspended somewhere between waking and sleep. I no longer knew what was real and what was a dream. And then, one day, a new face appeared in my hospital room. He entered with the head physician and a small group of medical interns. He wore a white coat, a name badge gleaming against his chest. Daniel Miller, medical student. He looked younger than the others, with tousled brown hair, deep blue eyes, and a smile that wasn't forced. While the others scribbled notes into their clipboards, he stopped writing, lifted his gaze, and looked straight at me. His eyes weren't probing or analytical. They were gentle, warm, filled with quiet understanding, as if he could see something beyond my diagnosis. It was as though he saw not a patient, but a wounded soul longing to be whole again. I was slumped against the wall, vacant-eyed, my head heavy from medication. Yet he smiled softly and gave me a small nod. It was such a simple gesture, but in that cold, colorless psychiatric ward, it felt like a beam of sunlight slipping through a crack in the wall. The next day, he came back. This time, he wasn't with the group. He was alone, holding a paper cup in his hand. Setting it down on the small table beside my bed, he said quietly, "The nurse told me you like coffee. This is a cappuccino, light milk, little sugar." I didn't answer. In fact, part of me wanted him to leave. I didn't trust anyone anymore. Everyone, everything felt like a potential threat. But he didn't seem bothered by my silence. He simply set the cup down, nodded again, and walked out. The next day, he returned once more. This time, he brought a small plastic bag with a few sprigs of purple wildflowers inside. "There's a patch of these growing out in the courtyard," he said with a gentle grin. I thought this room could use a little color. He placed the flowers in an old plastic cup, turning it into a makeshift vase. I still didn't speak, but my eyes followed his movements without realizing it. For a brief second, something inside me cracked, like the first fracture in a wall of ice. In the days that followed, he often came by in the late afternoon after his hospital rounds. Sometimes he would tell me small, ordinary stories about a child who laughed uncontrollably in the elevator, about an elderly patient who sang loudly in the hallway, or about the day he spilled an entire tray of charts and got scolded by the attending physician. I never replied, but I listened. And slowly, I realized I was waiting for his stories. In a place where every sound was mechanical and sterile, his voice felt like a tiny oil lamp, flickering but steadfast. Then, one afternoon, I surprised even myself by speaking. I asked softly, "Why do you keep coming here so often?" He smiled, eyes kind, "Because I think everyone needs someone beside them, even if it's just in silence." His answer made me cry. I couldn't remember the last time I had cried, but that day the tears came in waves. Danielle didn't try to stop them with comforting words. He just handed me a tissue and let me cry until I couldn't anymore. After that day, I began to talk more. At first it was just short answers. Then, little by little, I told him about my childhood in Texas, about the small town, the buzzing cicadas on summer nights. I told him about my dreams once upon a time, and about the dark years I spent trapped with Kyle. My voice trembled when I spoke of my fear of HIV. Daniel didn't flinch. One afternoon, he handed me an envelope. "I thought it was time you stopped being afraid," he said. Inside was the test result. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper. There, printed clearly in black ink, were the words, HIV negative. I froze. Then I broke down, sobbing with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Daniel rested his hand gently on my shoulder and said quietly, "You still have a whole life ahead of you, Emily. Don't let the past decide everything." For the first time in years, I felt a spark of real hope. It didn't come from the pills or the doctors. It came from the presence of one person who saw me not as a case file, but as a human being still worthy of love. As time went by, my meetings with Daniel gradually became part of my daily life. Every afternoon, he would stop by my hospital room, telling me small stories, sometimes about a sudden rain shower outside, or about the old tree by the window that had begun to sprout new leaves. To me, every little detail he shared felt like a breath of life, blowing a hint of color into that sterile white room. I didn't know when it started, but his presence became something I longed for. On the afternoons when he came late, I grew restless, my heart racing as my eyes drifted toward the door like a child waiting for her mother to come home. And when he finally appeared, with that warm smile of his, a strange light would rise inside me. One evening, as we sat together in the hospital courtyard, yellow lamplight spilling across the damp bricks, Daniel suddenly said, "I know you've been through terrible things, but your past doesn't change how I feel. To me, you are the strong Emily now, a woman who deserves love and happiness. I love you." I froze, my heart pounding wildly. For a moment, I wanted to laugh. Love? In a place where people didn't even believe I could ever be normal again? But when I looked into Daniel's eyes, those gentle, sincere eyes filled with compassion and warmth, I knew he meant every word. Tears welled up and streamed down my face as I whispered, trembling, "Why me? Why not someone else? My past, it's full of scars." He replied softly, "Because I know you too well. I know your pain, your fear, and that makes me want to take care of you, to protect you even more." That answer felt like a release, a quiet redemption. I leaned my head on his shoulder, for the first time in years, allowing myself to believe in two simple words: love and hope. We began a quiet relationship. Daniel was still busy with his studies and hospital rotations, while I continued my treatment. But through every glance, every word, every gentle brush of his hand against mine, we both knew we had found something precious. As my condition gradually improved, Daniel suggested taking me to Ohio to meet his family. I hesitated, worried, but he reassured me. "They need to know who you are. I don't want to hide you." So, one late autumn day, we drove to the suburbs of Columbus, where his parents lived. Their 2-story wooden house had a neat front yard and warmly lit windows. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt the tension in the air. His mother, a kind-faced woman with sad eyes, looked at me briefly, then turned away. His father, tall and thin with silver hair, spoke sternly. "Emily, my son tells me he wants to marry you. What do you think about that?" I was speechless. My throat tightened. Daniel squeezed my hand gently and answered calmly, "Yes, I do. I want to marry Emily." His mother burst into tears, while his father's brow furrowed in disappointment. "Daniel," he said firmly, "you have such a bright future. You're about to graduate from medical school. Why would you choose a girl with that kind of past? Have you thought about your future? About our family's reputation?" I sat there, frozen, my face burning with shame. Each word cut into me like a knife. I wanted to stand up and walk away, but Daniel's hand held mine tighter, refusing to let go. Then he spoke, his voice steady and clear. "I've thought about it. I have only one life, and I choose her." Silence fell over the room like a heavy weight. I looked at his parents and saw the pain in their eyes. They weren't cruel people. They were just afraid. Afraid that I would ruin their son's life. I understood that, and somehow it made the pain even deeper. That night, as we drove away from his parents' house, I broke down in the car. Through tears, I sobbed, "I don't want you to lose your family because of me." Daniel pulled me into his arms and whispered, "I haven't lost anything. I've only found what matters most." From the very beginning, our love had to face resistance. But it was that very resistance that made it stronger. And from that moment on, I knew, no matter what happened, Daniel would never let go of my hand. As time passed, the tension between me and Daniel's family slowly began to ease. He never gave up, patiently persuading his parents that his love for me was real, that if they kept rejecting us, they might lose their only son. At first, his parents were firm in their refusal, but Daniel's persistence and sincerity eventually softened them. They realized his feelings for me were not impulsive, but a conscious and responsible choice. Not wanting to lose him, they finally agreed, reluctantly, but sincerely. The day our two families met officially, I sat in the small, private room of a restaurant in Houston, my heart pounding in my chest. Daniel's hand held mine tightly, a silent reassurance. At first, the conversation was awkward, but gradually the atmosphere warmed. My father spoke honestly about his daughter's simple dreams, and Daniel's mother wept when she heard about the years I had endured. By the time dinner ended, both families had nodded in quiet approval. I was overwhelmed, so moved that I could hardly believe it was real. We had overcome the tallest wall, and before us lay the days of preparing for happiness. That night, after saying goodbye to Daniel's parents, he drove me back to our apartment in the old blue car he always used for school. We sat side by side, talking about little things, the simple wedding dress I wanted, the friends we'd invite, how it wouldn't need to be fancy, just filled with love. The road home was quiet. I leaned my head against the window, occasionally glancing at Daniel's face lit by the dashboard lights, my heart full of peace. I truly believed all our suffering was behind us, and happiness was finally ahead. But in an instant, everything shattered. At an intersection on the outskirts of town, a truck lost control and barreled through the red light, crashing straight into the passenger side, where I was sitting. The sound was deafening. Metal crunching, glass exploding. I barely heard Daniel scream before darkness swallowed everything. When I regained a flicker of consciousness, I saw flashing white lights, heard the piercing wail of the ambulance siren, felt rough hands lifting my bloodied body. Then, once again, the world faded away. Daniel was lucky. He escaped with minor injuries, just a few scratches and a broken arm. But I wasn't so fortunate. The direct impact had severely damaged my skull. The doctors said I had suffered a traumatic brain injury, a critical one. They looked at Daniel and my mother, their voices heavy with sorrow. "We'll do everything we can, but the chances are very slim." I was transferred to the intensive care unit. My body lay motionless, my breathing sustained only by machines. I looked like a puppet suspended by wires, a shell being kept alive by tubes and monitors. The doctors had nearly lost all hope, but Daniel was different. He refused to believe the shaking of their heads. He sat beside my bed day and night, holding my hand without letting go. While the world around him prepared for my goodbye, he clung to a fragile, desperate faith. And it was that faith that led him to a decision no one could have expected. He would marry me, even if I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Days stretched endlessly after the accident. I lay motionless, locked in deep coma, while the doctors continued to shake their heads. But Daniel never left my side, not for a moment. He was exhausted, but the hope in his eyes never faded. News of the crash spread quickly. Friends, colleagues, and both our families were devastated, unable to believe it was real. And right when I hovered between life and death, Daniel made a decision that left everyone stunned. She once told me she wanted to wear a wedding dress, that she dreamed of a wedding, even a simple one. I'll marry Emily. Even if she's in a coma, I'll keep my promise. His friends were shocked. At first, his parents tried to stop him, saying it would be too painful. But Daniel stood firm. "I don't need a perfect wedding. I just need to keep my word to her. If Emily's time in this world is limited, I want her to go as my wife." Those words touched everyone's hearts. In the end, both families nodded silently through their tears, accepting his wish. That day, a corner of the hospital room was gently transformed. A vase of white flowers sat by the bed. A few curtains were drawn to soften the light. Daniel's friends stood as witnesses, eyes glistening. I lay still, pale and fragile, my eyes closed in a long sleep. But over my head, a thin white veil was placed, like the echo of a dream that never had the chance to come true. Daniel wore a simple suit. His eyes were red, but filled with calm determination. He took my cold hand, slipped a small ring onto my finger, and spoke, voice trembling yet clear. "I, Daniel, take you, Emily, to be my wife. In sickness and in health, in wealth or in poverty, in joy or in sorrow. I will love you and care for you all my life." The room fell silent. Only the rhythmic beep, beep of the monitor filled the air, like an invisible witness to their vows. Daniel's friends wiped their tears. My mother buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. His parents clung to each other, trembling with emotion. A pastor, Daniel's close family friend, stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. His voice was deep and solemn. "Today, before God and all those who love you, you have become husband and wife. This may not be a marriage before the law, but it is sacred before heaven. May God hear your vows and bless you both. May love be the strength that carries you through whatever lies ahead." Daniel leaned down and kissed my forehead. I didn't know it then, but that was the most painful and holy kiss of his life. After the ceremony, Daniel brought me home, to the small apartment we had once dreamed of building together. He didn't want me to remain in the coldness of the hospital any longer. With help from doctors and friends, he transformed the apartment into a care room and took on the role of full-time caregiver himself, changing bandages, cleaning wounds, reading aloud, telling stories, day after day, hour after hour. The little apartment became a makeshift hospital room, filled with the soft hum of machines and the quiet rhythm of devotion. But in Daniel's eyes, it wasn't a hospital. It was our home, the place where he believed a miracle would someday come. A year had passed since that fateful night. For me, time meant nothing, just an endless stretch of darkness. But for Daniel, it was 365 long days of patience, devotion, and undying love. Not once did he leave me, not even for a single day. Every morning he woke up early, made breakfast, cleaned our small apartment, changed my bandages, and cared for me. Every night he read aloud a few pages from a book or whispered words of love into my ear, as if I could still hear him. Everyone else believed there was no hope left, but Daniel never stopped believing in a miracle. My mother often came from our small hometown to visit. She held my hand, tears streaming down her wrinkled face, whispering silent prayers. To her, I was still her fragile daughter in need of protection. And like Daniel, she never let go of that faint hope that I might one day open my eyes again. Then the miracle happened, suddenly and without warning. That morning, exactly 1 year after the accident, the sunlight streamed through the window and fell gently across my face. Daniel was sitting at his desk, finishing a scholarship application he had been working on for months. He looked up when he heard a faint sound. I had moved. My fingers trembled slightly, curling around the edge of the bedsheet. My eyelids fluttered, and then, slowly, they opened. The first thing I saw was the patchy ceiling bathed in sunlight. Then Daniel's face, his wide eyes filled with disbelief. "Emily! Oh God, Emily, you're awake!" His voice broke, overflowing with emotion. He rushed to my side, grabbing my hand, tears falling like rain. I looked at him, my lips moving weakly. My voice was barely a whisper, but it was clear. "Daniel." That single word was the miracle itself. Daniel broke down, crying as he pulled me into his arms, as though afraid that if he let go, I would disappear. Soon after, my mother arrived. The moment she saw me awake, she burst into tears, her aged face trembling, but her eyes shone with pure joy. She embraced Daniel and me tightly, and the three of us cried together, tears not of sorrow, but of rebirth. Even the doctors could hardly believe it. They called it a rare, extraordinary recovery, but we knew the truth. It wasn't science that brought me back. It was love, and Daniel's unshakable faith. The days that followed were a new kind of journey. I had to learn everything again. How to eat, how to speak, how to walk. Daniel was always there, holding me, guiding me patiently through every step. Some nights, when pain overwhelmed me and I wanted to give up. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I asked him, "What if I never fully recover? Would you ever regret choosing me?" Daniel held my hand tightly, looked straight into my eyes, and said firmly, "I chose you long before you opened your eyes, and I would choose you 1,000 times more." Little by little, I grew stronger. From a wheelchair, I learned to stand. From hesitant steps, I learned to walk. Each step was a victory, and Daniel cheered for me like a child every time. The miracle wasn't just that I woke up, it was that I came back to life, bit by bit, with him beside me. One sunny afternoon, Daniel brought me a gift. He opened his phone and showed me photos and a video his friends had recorded on the day of our hospital wedding. On the screen, I saw Daniel in his simple suit, eyes red but filled with love, while I lay motionless under a white bridal veil. Around us stood our parents and friends, silent and tearful as the pastor prayed. The hospital room had become the holiest place on earth. I burst into tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming happiness. Even when I was unconscious, he had stayed, believed, and loved me without wavering. Daniel pulled me into his arms and whispered, "You missed that day, but from now on, we'll write all the days ahead, together." A few months later, when I had regained enough strength to stand and walk short distances, we applied for a marriage license and held an official wedding ceremony to turn the vows made that day into a lawful union. It was a small, intimate wedding, but unlike the first one, this time there were candles, flowers, smiles, laughter, and radiant faces instead of tears. Everyone there was deeply moved and filled with joy for our miraculous journey. When we signed our names on the marriage certificate, I felt as though I had been reborn. It wasn't just a second wedding. It was the legal seal on a love proven by blood, tears, and faith. From the day I awoke from that long sleep, I knew my life had entered a completely new chapter. I was no longer just a survivor returning from the edge of a coma. I had become a woman who was loved, cherished, and living fully within that love. My health improved little by little. At first, I could only take a few shaky steps down the narrow hallway. Then Daniel began walking with me around the neighborhood, where wildflowers grew along the roadside, and the golden sunlight spilled gently over everything. Every step I took felt like a small triumph, and to Daniel, each one was proof that his faith had never been in vain. A year later, Daniel received a graduate scholarship from a university in France. He hesitated, unwilling to leave me, but I held his hand and said, "You have to go. Your dream is also mine, and I'll go with you, one way or another." And so we went to Europe together. I continued my rehabilitation at a modern medical center, while Daniel devoted himself to his studies. In the mornings, I attended physical therapy sessions, drenched in sweat but glowing with determination. In the evenings, I sat beside him in a small library, reading quietly while listening to the steady rhythm of his pen moving across paper. One spring day, as cherry blossoms bloomed across the streets of Paris, I realized I had truly stepped into a new life. My body was strong enough to walk for hours. My mind was free from the shadows of the past. And then, the most miraculous thing of all happened. I was pregnant. When we found out, Daniel dropped to his knees, wrapped his arms around my belly, and cried like a child. Through his tears, he whispered, "This is the greatest miracle love has ever given us." Now, in our small apartment on the outskirts of Paris, each morning I watch Daniel prepare breakfast, his clumsy hands moving with so much tenderness. I place my palm on my belly, feeling the tiny movements within, and I know that we have walked through enough darkness to deserve this light. I often think back to everything we've endured, the poverty of my childhood, the pain of the past, the cold hospital room where I once lay motionless. What once seemed like the end was really just the beginning, the path that taught me the truest meaning of faith and love. Because the miracle of love is real. My life is no longer a series of tragedies. It is proof that miracles exist, that if we keep walking, step by step, light will always be waiting at the end of the tunnel. And I truly believe this. When love is strong enough, it can turn the impossible into possible. It can heal every wound, rekindle every lost hope, and open the door to something extraordinary.